Welcome back to Track Talk. This is the first semifinal game in the 1830 tournament to finish. It is being played by Alanese, myself, Track Talk, Rumbleman, and Adrian. I took pretty comprehensive notes of my thoughts throughout this game, at least early on. So I will try to reconstruct my thinking as the game progresses rather than comment retrospectively. Um, and we'll see how that works out. Alanese is going to lead us off into the auction, and we'll be bidding on the Camden and Amboy right off the bat. I will go for the D&H, Rumbleman for the M&H, and Adrian will contest the C&A. Alanese back up and goes for my D&H. And I think the book play here, so to speak, would be for me to bid on the M&H to try and prevent Rumbleman from getting a face value private from an early pull. But I actually intentionally am going to bid on the Champlain and St. Lawrence here. And the reason I'm doing this is even though it gives Rumbleman an easy pull for the M&H, I really didn't want to be split on the D&H and the M&H and forced to price and force. It will give me a face value Champlain and St. Lawrence, which is granted much worse than the M&H. But it also kind of paints a target on Rumbleman's back, at least in my opinion. So maybe he'll be focused in the early stages of the game because people recognize he got a really good deal in the auction. That's my logic, at least. So I'm hoping to leave the auction with the Champlain and St. Lawrence and cheap D&H and avoid having to price and force the M&H. I think it would be very fair to criticize me for this play. I think that if I were watching a game, I would criticize this play, but I did have a rationale for it, and it just comes down to not wanting to be forced to price and force. So Rumbleman does pull as expected, and this leaves me and Alanese to bid out the D&H. And here I'm just trying to get out of this as unscathed as possible. So I decide to bid to 100 in the hopes that I'll just scare Alanese off and just get a D&H. Of course, it'd be nice to get a cheap D&H, but I figure if I kind of try and slowly boil the frog here, I may end up actually paying more than 100. So I just bid 100 off the bat, and I do succeed in scaring him off. I think Alanese probably regrets that. He probably should have bid me at least one more time because now he and Adrian are left in the position to duel for the Camden and Amboy. And, Alanese basically has to hope that Adrian loses this and gives him the priority on the Camden and Amboy. Which means that Alanese may have to pay a very high price for the C&A. So we'll watch them bid this up. Gets bid up to 230, and Adrian actually wins it. I'm also a little bit surprised that Alanese didn't take that a little higher. Again, if he had forced Adrian to bid him up, or if he had forced Adrian to fall in the B&O, Alanese's position would probably be better out of the auction than it is with the B&O private. I will note that Alanese pars the B&O at 90, so maybe seeing a float of that. This leaves me priority, so I'm pretty happy. And I have to choose between basically the C&O or the NYNH. I could take the PRR, but really why? I mean, it's not going to delay Adrian all that long, and I think the C&O and the NYNH are a little bit better in the early game. The revenue in the C&O is slightly higher. It has more tokens, but it's also very likely to be blocked here because the B&O is floating early. But I do have the D&H teleport, so even if they block me, it's not the end of the world, and I'd almost like to see them invest the track points and tokens working to block me early rather than developing their own runs. The downside is that if I take the NYNH, another player will be forced on the C&O, and they will not have the teleport, so they'll be facing the same conundrum that I am without the resources that I have, and this is what we saw Triple J do in my last tournament game. And I think that there's really good merit to that thought process, but ultimately I decide to take the C&O. So now I'm basically just hoping to operate later in operating order in stock round 2, but I will be operating pretty early because I have the first float here. So I take the C&O. Rumbleman is going to take the PRR, trying to deny that to Adrian. and Alanaze is floating the B&O as expected. I think the rest of the stock round is not all that interesting, and we'll just go into actually, it looks like people are investing in the C&O, and we are into the operating round. And the operating round is pretty standard. B&O heads towards Lancaster as expected, buys a train. I head towards Chicago, buy a train. PRR heads towards Lancaster, probably is not going to get there, at least that's my thought. And that brings us into stock round 2. So my overarching priority here is to make the C&O operate late. I do not want to be in a position where I have to buy the 2 trains for other players to buy in their privates. And that's my overriding goal here. The cash is going to work out such that I will have just enough for that B&O share, so I buy it, even though I'm a little bit worried it's going to cost me priority. Rumbleman is actually going to buy the C&O, so this is really not working out great for me because we're going to see the C&O float up, which is the exact opposite of what I want to do. So I'm already anticipating withholding to try and bring myself behind the PRR into stock round 3. Will really depend if Adrian decides to sell shares here and float or not. And really, I'm anticipating Adrian selling and buying the NYNH here, which means that I'm hoping to have priority early enough that I can get the float on the NYC, which would then cooperate with my D&H teleport of the C&O. So I'm hoping for 1, early in priority, and 2, late in operating order. And it really just depends on what Adrian decides to do here. That's going to determine my next steps. Adrian's passing, which is not what I was hoping to see. So I do sell a C&O, and this is again just to get an early leg up on operating behind the other players. I'm a little bit less worried about priority and willing to sacrifice it because it looks like Adrian's actually not going to be floating the company. So we just pass into operating round 2. We have a little bit of a stall here. I really can't understate how important I think it is that I was allowed to sell the C&O down there. And operate later. Eventually, Adrian is going to float, or somebody's going to break this stalemate, and it's going to be very important that the C&O is operating late. B&O gets into Lancaster, PRR is blocked, he's going to token there. He buys another 2 train. PRR heading towards Pittsburgh because he's blocked, he also drops a token. And C&O is now up. I link up with Chicago, and I believe I withhold here. No, I pay out. I was thinking that I might have withheld just to ensure that I would operate behind any newly floated companies, but it did not. I also didn't push through into my privates there. Would have been pretty expensive to do it, and I'm anticipating a new company floating, allowing me to do that for less. Here we'll see Rumbleman sell out of the C&O, which is nice. It's going to move me down later in the market. And I think he did that because he was potentially worried about a dump in the next operating round or next stock round. Adrian's selling out, and he sells the C&O instead of the PRR. So now I'm in yellow and operating late, which is, again, my whole goal. He does take the NYNH as expected. So right now, operating order for me looks beautiful. B&O and PRR have to decide whether or not it's worth pushing through these 2s to get the 3 train, whereas I am going to be operating behind the CNA player who's highly motivated to buy in the 3. So I should have a pretty easy buy-in. It's also important to me that the PRR operates before the NYNH. It's possible that Rumbleman could try and manipulate operating order here. So I'm debating holding on to my liquidity so I can buy and sell a share real quick if I need to change operating order. But I think I ultimately end up investing too early. No, I do pass here. And I invest in the PRR, which I think ends up being something I regret because it just limits my options in terms of manipulating turn order. So Rumbleman sees the danger and puts the PRR behind the NYNH, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. If I had set on my liquidity and not bought that PRR share, I would have the option of buying and then selling an NYNH. Now, if I sell a share of the PRR, I'm going to be doing myself a disservice by putting it further behind the NYNH. He buys a B&O. Adrian's continuing to float. I sell a B&O, and I think I had to do that because I am not trusting Adrian to put himself behind the PRR, so I'm going to do it for him. which is painful because it costs me a share, and I'm not going to be able to invest my money without losing priority here. And I really, really want to have priority because I want to make sure that I'm able to float this NYC in the next stock round after having bought in my privates. So definitely buying this PRR share is something that I regret in hindsight. And I have it in my notes that that was a concern, but I just didn't stick to my guns and got greedy. Rumbleman's passing, Adrian's floated. I'm passing because I want to go second in priority. Adrian is passing as well, so we're into operating round 3. So all things considered, I think that worked out okay for me. I'm quibbling a little bit about my PRR decision, but to be honest with you, I'm early in priority and I'm late in operating order. That's exactly what I've wanted since the start of the game, so I've managed to achieve that. I don't think I can be too critical of how things are going so far. The operating round, B&O is heading down south. Does have 2 trains, so I guess just wants to take advantage of that, but I'm just going to question again why even buy those 2 trains. Don't have to do that. Runs them for 100, pays it out. PRR heading further west. Not going to be looking to cooperate with the CNO, just setting up for an early block. But of course, the CNO's whole goal is to teleport over to Scranton, so this is kind of a useless track. Runs for 30. He's still blocked at Lancaster. And then this is the big question. Is the NYNH going to lay track? Is he going to lay track for the NYC? And is he going to buy in his private? So he is going to decline to lay track, probably realizing that I have priority on him in the stock round. So I'm going to get to choose the company that floats. And he's going to make it a hard decision for me and float the company that I don't float and lay the track to help it. So that's, I think, the right move. But he has to do me a big favor here by buying in the 2s. So he does get a max value Camden Amboy buy, but mostly things are going the way I want. So I buy in my privates and float, or not float, teleport. And I guess you could make the argument that maybe I should have waited to do that, but I think I was worried about racing the B&O towards running in Allentown. So as it stands, by teleporting now, I am tipping my hand here and giving away my strategy, but it does guarantee me access to Reading and Allentown. So I pay out, buy a 3, and we're into stock round 4, which is really good for me. Again, I'm early in priorities, so I'm going to stag that NYC, and even if the NYNH decides to block me, I'll have viable runs through the Scranton tile. Alanace is up and buys my CNO. And at this point in the game, I'm a little bit confused why he's buying my CNO. It's got a depleted treasury. I'm in a position where I'm going to be selling to float a new company. Very, very likely that this company is withholding for a good long time. So even though the shares are reasonably cheap, it's really not that attractive an investment. And I'm kind of confused why there's such a priority being placed on the CNO at this stage in the game. Could be a move to trash, but seems unlikely. It would do me a big favor if he were to do that. So I think he's genuinely interested in owning this company, and I don't see the rationale at this point in the game. I will sell out of the PRR and have a pretty easy float of the NYC. I didn't want to put myself in a position where I could potentially lose control of the CNO. It's a pretty key linchpin for my strategy in terms of getting the NYC runs in the early and mid game. So I could have sold for a higher par, but I really didn't want to even leave that as a possibility. Rumbleman is going to buy a B&O. Adrian is now going to be parring, I'm assuming, the B&M, but it looks like he's going to do a little trashing on the way potentially. I'm continuing to float the NYC. And I was really hoping here that we would see Adrian float the B&M and then he and I could cooperate to rust the 2s and the B&O and the PRR. So I was a little bit disappointed to see him buying shares instead of floating. But I will continue to float my NYC. Rumbleman is going to trash the CNO and buy another B&O, which he immediately trashes. So definitely Rumbleman is hurting people's net worth and liquidity here, trying to minimize the ability for us to snowball off these private buy-ins. Adrian now looks like he's selling out of the PRR, so taking a similar page out of Rumbleman's playbook and goes back and buys the CNO. So both of these players interested in doing some trashing potentially, and I really don't get it. I think that Adrian should be floating the B&M here to rest these 2s. Not much I can do about it though. Rumbleman is going to buy an NYNH, and Adrian then sells out. So I'm like at a loss to explain the player's decisions here for the CNO purchases. It really does not look like an attractive company at this stage in the game, and a lot of investment from both of these players, Adrian and Alanes, to invest in this company at this stage when it's almost certainly going to be withholding, and they both need cash for paying shares. Adrian does finally sell out, but he sells the NYNH, which is crazy. The NYNH is what is going to give the B&M its runs. So if you put it into orange, very cheap shares with only a 20% presidency, somebody's going to take that. Rubbleman has already bought a share. Would be no trouble at all for him to buy two more. And what do you do if you don't have the NYNH as the B&M presidency? You're kind of screwed. So this decision, sale of the NYNH, is crazy. And I, sitting on the NYC and the CNO, I'm looking at this map and saying, Jesus Christ, if I can get this NYNH presidency, the B&M is screwed, and my three companies are a powerhouse. They're going to have like sole control over New York, and can lock down all the track and just double tap New York. It's going to be crazy. So I am really, really loving this from Adrian in the sense that it's going to kill his B&M and help my two companies massively if I'm able to steal this presidency. So my goal here is to float the NYC and then rush over to the NYNH and buy that up if Rumbleman doesn't. And Rumbleman, I think he should be buying these shares too. It would be four cheap shares, or three cheap shares. He can withhold once or twice, rehabilitate this, and have two strong companies. So really not a fan of this decision. He does float the B&M as predicted, so I'm hoping now that we will be able to cooperate to bring out the four and rust these two companies. I think if I'm able to get the NYNH and we're able to rust these twos, I just run away with this game. And I was very, very confident of that at this stage in the game. Alane's passing. I'm almost floated. Rumbleman's sitting on cash. So this is the one scary part, is that I think he's seeing this danger here of two companies floating ahead of him, and he's going to try and trash my company. But it does mean that he's not going to be investing cash into stealing the NYNH, so I may be able to do that. So he buys a PRR. Adrian floating the B&M. I buy and sell my NYC because, again, I'm going to be throwing all this cash over in the NYNH. Rumbleman is going to trash me. And unfortunately for myself, I trashed myself once here. So he may be able to put me behind the PRR and B&O and get them runs. He's going to have to sell a share to do that, but it's probably worth his while to do it. And it's only possible because I sold one of my own shares. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to do it. But I do think it's more important for me to get the NYNH than it is to rust these trains. So I'm okay with that trade-off. Adrian continuing to float. Alane's passing. I'm buying the NYNH, hoping that Rumbleman is not going to buy that cheap share. He's got just enough cash for it, but he is going to actually sell it, make it easier for me to take over in order to trash my NYC to protect his PRR, which I see the rationale. I think both Rumbleman and I are equally aware of the tension here, and we are just choosing to make different decisions, which is fine. I can't criticize it. So he buys and sells the NYC, protecting the PRR, but the B&O is still potentially vulnerable here. We could see those twos rust. We'll see. Adrian is almost floated, and I'm going to work on stealing the NYNH. I am forced to sell a CNO here, and I feel comfortable doing that because, one, Alanes doesn't have cash to buy it. It's $50, he only has 30. And two, even if he buys it, he's only up to 40%. So I feel okay about that. I really did not want to run the risk of losing the presidency of the NYC, which would be, in theory, possible if I had sold down to 4 shares with these cheap shares in the market. So although I don't love giving up a secure presidency of the CNO, it's definitely the safer move than giving up the secure presidency of the NYC. If I lose control of the NYC here, I'd be left with the NYNH presidency and the CNO presidency with no cash on either one of them. That's looking like a bankruptcy. Regardless, I make the decision I make, and I buy up the presidency of the NYNH. So at this point in the game, I think it's game over. I am calling it for myself at this point in the game. And I mean, I don't think it's unreasonable to be confident. I think this is an extraordinarily strong position. I got a really healthy presidency in the NYC. I have massive track synergy, great map position, and I got a split presidency here that I'm going to withhold to rehabilitate the treasury. Can withhold on the NYNH. I have a big share lead. Yeah, I'm anticipating at this point in the game a runaway victory for myself, and we'll see how that works out. Maybe I'm foreshadowing. Rumbleman's passing. Adrian is going to float on the B&M, and I think we'll just see us pass into the operating round. Actually, Adrian's going to buy Peng's share, but then we pass into the operating round. I take it back. Rumbleman buys a share. Okay. Now we're into the operating round, and actually, Rumbleman buying a share um, leaves Adrian with priority. So instead of going second in priority, I'm going third in priority as a result of this kind of random B&M purchase. All right. Adrian now is probably pretty concerned. What's he going to do in this situation? The NYNH is not going to be cooperating, neither is the NYC. So he's going to upgrade his home. Fair enough. And does he push trains? No, just buys a single 3 train. So that's really bad for Adrian. PRR is up, and he is going to be able to get into Lancaster, which is fine from my perspective because it means that neither him nor the B&O is going to be running towards Reading and Allentown. Drops the token. That token's not as valuable as it usually is now that Scranton's been laid. Runs for 60, buys a 3, and it looks like the B&O is going to get to run its trains, so that's a little bit unfortunate, but I am very happy with the way the last stock round ended up, so I really can't complain about anything at this point. Philly upgrades, runs for 130, pays it, buys a 3. NYC, laying towards New York, of course, buys a 3 out of the NYNH actually, and I'm able to do that since nobody has pushed through to the 4s. So I'm going to leave my 2 trains in the NYNH, get to run with them, and then buy the 4 with the NYNH. CNO is going to lay Reading and Allentown, and I'm trying to make sure that I shut down this track so there's no pass through from the south, which I think I've managed to accomplish. I do have 2 runs for my 2 trains here, so I'm running for 100. I'm withholding since I only own 50% of the revenue and I have 2 parasites. I am very confident in my position in the game at this stage, but I am worried about a potential bankruptcy. So I think the only way I lose this game is if trains get pushed aggressively and I somehow bankrupt. But otherwise, I think I'm safe. NYNH lays towards Albany. And I'll note that there's not really a way for me to entirely block the B&O. There's always going to be either the Providence track or this $120 track for them to bypass this New Haven and Hartford track. So I have to make a decision here, and I decide to force him to run the $120 track into the DIT if he wants to get access west, as opposed to run into Providence and then have higher revenues. So it's strictly worse for the B&M, I think, this type of track than this type of track. But it does leave him with some options. So I run for 50 and I pay it out. I'm not entirely recalling why I paid here instead of withholding. I am worried about cash. I think it's just because I realized I didn't have any revenue on the CNO or the NYC, so I needed some revenue to be relevant in the next stock round. So I'm paying even with only just 40% of the revenue. I buy the 4, and I have exactly enough money for my token. So if the B&M tries to pressure for Albany, I'll be able to token. I'm just leaving my options open here. I am kind of laser focused on shutting out this B&M. I'm feeling pretty safe from the south because I was able to lay this blockage. So this is my priority here to make sure this token doesn't end up somewhere I don't want it. B&M operates, lays the $120 track for the run. He's going to be able to run for 70, pays it. And I'm watching this. I'm just really worried about how F18 gets laid here. It's going to be hard for me to shut it down. Just the track points don't work out for me because I can't run a company through New York. So I am cognizant of the danger here. PRR upgrades Baltimore and is going to run for 120. He's going to buy in his Schuylkill and the Mohawk and Hudson. So he's going to be floating in the next stock round most likely. B&O laying into Philly and is still sitting on a $300 with a token. Runs for 120 back to me. So I really thought a lot about how to operate my three companies here. My priority was to really try and protect Scranton from a B&M token. Because my plan here is to get New York or the NYC over into Scranton for a token, and then token Albany with the NYNH. So I think with those two tokens, I will have basically locked down all this track, and then CNO and the NYNH can double token New York, or maybe even get a token on Philadelphia if they're lucky. And I think if that is what comes to pass, I'll win this game. So what I end up doing is I upgrade New York for the revenue, and that will allow the NYNH to lay F18 if it wants to. Paying out, NYNH lays F18. And my goal here is to prevent the B&M from getting a token in Scranton, but also from just laying a sharp turn onto New York here. So until Brown, there's not going to be any valid upgrade on F18 that will get him into New York. And then this will allow him to upgrade towards Scranton, but as long as I don't actually upgrade Scranton for him, he can't token it before I can. CNO is going to upgrade Scranton, and we will talk about the decisions I make on the CNO here ad nauseum at a certain point. But I will just comment at this point that I am obviously worried about the B&M token. So I'm laying unfriendly track, trying to set myself up for a triple track lay in the next stock round or next operating round for a token on the NYC here, and then tokening Albany here. I'm also very aware that the CNO presidency is potentially vulnerable. So I only have 40% of the company. There's a share already in the market, and priority order is such that if Adrian were to sell any shares, Alanaze is going to have the option to buy them before I do. So my goal here is to scare people out of the CNO, make it unattractive of a company, pick up a bunch of cheap shares. But I also want to try and make the NYNH an unattractive company for the same reason. I just don't want to have to invest in my own companies. I want people to sell out of them so I can buy other paying shares. So what I end up deciding to do is to put all the cash into the NYNH, or almost all the cash, and then leave the CNO train locked with non-permanent trains. My thinking here is that the CNO won't have enough money to buy a permanent train. It's going to be train locked and operating late. So if the fives come out early, this is going to be a huge liability to whoever's presidency it is. And then the NYNH has some cash, but not a lot of cash, and no train. So people aren't going to want to take that either. So what I end up doing is buying the NYNH's train out of it and leaving all the cash in the NYNH. However, I get a little greedy here. I leave myself enough cash that with the private payout, I'll have the money for the token. So that's my rationale for why I did what I did, and we'll see what ends up happening. I also kill the CPR suitcase here, trying to slow the game down a little bit so that my three companies have time to afford permanent trains. That brings us to stock round 5. And stock round 5 is where I lose the game. So Adrian's up. He's going to sell out of the NYNH. So my strategy to make this company unattractive has worked, at least in that case. And he's going to min float the Erie. And I have literally no idea why he does this. The Erie is not a good company in this game. It's got no friends over here. There's one president owning 3 of these companies. There's no chance that the Erie is going to get any runs into New York. Adrian is the B&M presidency. He doesn't have any way to lay friendly track for the Erie. He doesn't control any access to Pittsburgh. So the Erie is going to be left to, lay all of its own track with no help, and it's going to be forced to run the double O's. It's just a terrible, terrible float. And he floats it for min. So it's not even getting himself a lot of cash for permanent trains. It's just worthless. Making it even worse is that he doesn't even have the cash to float it. So he's going to have to sell shares that are paying shares that, granted, maybe he didn't even want in the first place, like the CNO shares that withheld twice. But that is the decision. All right. So Alanaze is still buying the CNO. So I've failed to make the CNO unattractive to Alanaze, and we'll see what ends up happening there. But my goal here was to make both companies unattractive. I've succeeded in making one of them unattractive, but maybe left the more important company vulnerable. Me, I see cheap shares. I buy cheap shares. Rumbleman, he's ahead in net worth as a result of his late private buy-in, and he sees that there's a player with very little company treasury money, 3 presidencies, sitting not too far away from permanent trains. So I think that his rationale here is that all the net worths are low. He's been trashing shares all game. He's going to push for a bankruptcy. So even though the CPR suitcase has been denied, he's going to float that and try and push trains. At least that's the rationale that I see here, which I think is a reasonable response. If you see someone playing a very brittle strategy with a lot of train liability and high stock density, you got to try and bankrupt them, or else they're going to win late. So I think that's a reasonable response to Rumbleman. I did try and break the suitcase for the CPR to prevent this, but he figures, well, if they bankrupt early enough, whether or not I can suitcase the CPR becomes kind of irrelevant. So I think that's what we're seeing here. It is kind of a chaotic strategy, though, right? Just because I have 3 presidencies and little treasury doesn't mean that I'm necessarily the one to go bankrupt. None of the players have really a lot of security if there's a fast train rush. And the net worth difference is not so high that Rumbleman should feel super secure in pushing for a bankruptcy. He's, $250 ahead of his closest competitor. He's going to be falling back on 6 shares. That's $60 of revenue or net worth lost just the minute the CPR operates. So, yeah, we'll see. I understand why he's doing it, but it is a high risk, high reward type thing. Adrian is going to buy a paying share, so it looks like he was just trying to reserve the presidency of the Erie. I really criticized that decision earlier, so I won't talk about it anymore for now. Alanase is going to buy my cheap NYNH. He is taking a similar strategy to myself. So he's going to buy the cheap shares and hope the game kind of goes late, which I can't criticize, right? I mean, that's the strategy I'm taking. I don't have any cheap shares to buy, so I buy a sold PRR off the market. Rumbleman is going to continue to float. And it looks like Adrian is just rearranging his portfolio a little bit. Alanase buys my NYC. Rumbleman, CPR, and CPR is now floated. And now what happens here is interesting. And this is why I think that Rumbleman's strategy is a bankruptcy. He's going to start pressuring the Erie presidency from Adrian. And I think the correct response if you're Adrian here is just to let him have it. Who cares? It's a low float, a low par. So it's not like he's getting a ton of cash for it. It has miserable map potential. And it's going to be shares that are eating against a certain limit that are not going to be running well. So if you're Adrian here, I think you let him take it, sell it down, and buy paying shares and just go on your way. Let him have it. But Adrian is pretty committed here, and he's going to actually defend this presidency. So he's got to sell paying shares in the B&O, decent map position, and he's going to invest further in the Erie. Rumbleman is interested in a bankruptcy play, so he's going to press because he wants to make sure this Erie floats. He needs 2 new companies to float in order to push trains. So he goes up to 30%. That company's now floated. And Adrian is going to continue to defend. And this is where keeping it real goes wrong for me. So we had a very closely split presidency. I had to make the decision to sell either the NYC or the C&O in the last stock round so that I could steal the NYNH. That left me with just 40% of this company. And Adrian Alanase have been very aggressively buying these shares. So Adrian had 20% of this company. Again, I've questioned the rationale there, but he does. He sells them, and now Alanase is going to steal this presidency. And this is terrible for me. I mean, I was kind of like on top of the world a moment ago before those shares were sold. I had a guaranteed win in my mind for this game. Now, if I lose this company, it is so bad. It's like a guaranteed loss. I've gone from 100% chance of winning to 0% chance of winning if Alanase takes this company. And let's just look at the decisions I made in the last operating round to think about this a little bit. So I bought the 4 train out of the NYNH into this C&O to try and make these companies unattractive to the other players, not realizing that I was leaving. I mean, I realized it, but I didn't think of the consequences, that the NYNH is now trainless, and the NYNH is going to be forced to buy a 4 train, potentially opening up the fives to the other players. I only have one train in the NYC, um, and I may have to buy the poison 4 on the N1H with basically no permanent train money afterwards. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that I'm very, very dependent on controlling Scranton. If I don't control Scranton, the NYNH and the NYC are just really not that good, um, at least not in this game. And Alanis has recognized that, hey, he has the B&O with the token. That's only $120 away from laying it in Scranton. And this is only possible because I upgraded Scranton away from the B&M, even though I really didn't need to upgrade Scranton at all. I could have left it yellow and just allowed the B&M to upgrade F18. He still wouldn't have been able to get the token, and then I could have defended from the B&O or the B&M. So my play in the operating round with the C&O was atrocious. I have to just really berate myself for how this works out. Um, I mean, I think it's only made possible because of questionable decision making from Adrian in a couple of different ways. Like, why did you buy these shares? Why did you float the Erie? Why are you defending the Erie? All of those things I'm gonna criticize, but I think the fault for the way things work out here, it was resting pretty squarely on my shoulders because I really, really fumbled on the CNO. Um, my modus operandi in 1830 in particular is to play very aggressively, to prioritize share density, to dumpster dive, steal people's presidencies, and then win late. And I think that's a very strong strategy, but it really relies on strong tactical um, play. So an error of this magnitude, that is not something that my strategy can really bounce back from realistically. Um, so anyway, Adrian sells the CNO shares instead of the PRR shares. I don't know what the rationale there is. If he didn't want the CNO, I don't know why he bought it in the first place. But anyway, sells the CNO, is going to defend the Erie, and then Alanese is like licking his chops. He's waiting in the wings, and he immediately steals the presidency of the CNO, which is the right play. I think that's very very much the right call from Alanese. Um, so at this point, like I said, I went from 100 to 0 in two stock actions. Just really a disheartening turn of events. And at this point in the game, I don't even know what I can do. I think I'm just done. Or I think I just lost the game. So at this point in the game, I start to kind of play a little bit sloppily, just because I'm not really too engaged in the game anymore. Not to make too many excuses, but it is what it is. So Rumbleman is no longer interested in stealing the Erie. He's probably accomplished all he really wanted to do by floating it, and he's going to go back and buy an NYC, which will allow us to pass into the operating room. Actually, not quite yet. He's going to buy another NYH. But I think now we're going into the operating round. So really, really devastating stock round for me in my chances in this game. The other players, on the other hand, are sticking to their guns. So Rumbleman was making a bankruptcy push. We'll see how that develops. He is going to lay track for the CPR. Might as well while you have the cash. And he is going to buy a train. B&M gets the F18 upgrade. And again, this was really all he could have done. So why was I laying the Scranton track? That was so short-sighted, or really a miscalculation. But he pays it out. PRR heading towards Scranton. I think Rumbleman also probably sees the utility of getting a token here, but he doesn't have the track points to make it happen like Alanese does on the B&O. So PRR runs for 120. B&O hops right across G15 into Scranton, drops the token, and that is it. Game over for Track Talk. He's going to run for 120, withholds it, and buys a 4. He's just consolidating cash in the CNO, probably hoping that the 5 comes out because he realizes the NYNH is going to be forced to buy this 4. We talked about that. So the CNO might be able to pick up a cheap 5 train here. NYC buys upgrades Albany. And I think I decide here that I'm going to have to buy a 4 regardless. So I might as well buy it with the NYC and then try and get a 5 on the NYNH. Yeah. So I'm looking at this. I say, I know that this 4 has my name on it. So I might as well buy it here, force the Erie to buy it, or at least try and force him to buy it, and then emergency buy a 5 on the NYNH. I think that's my thinking. Erie, Didn't have to buy a train there, but decides to. NYNH um, manages to snag a token, which he really needed, and gets a permanent train. But boy, is that rough. And now the CNO has barely enough cash with a withhold to get a 5 for himself as well. Gets the good upgrade for Philly that he was hoping for, screws over the PRR, withholds, and there's 2 5s done. B&M is going to get the upgrade into New York. And at this point in the game, I don't think that I'm really caring all that much about the New York token. It just is not something that I'm really rushing to defend. I think I'm prioritizing the Rochester token on the NYC more than New York. So I don't care that much about that upgrade at this point. B&M buys a 5, leaving the CPR $10 short of the 6. So he withholds, and we are seeing a pretty explosive train rush here. So Rumbleman's goal of a possible bankruptcy is coming to fruition. He doesn't have a suitcase though, so he is also going to be on the hook for a permanent train if he isn't careful. So this is why I was saying that this bankruptcy gambit may not really work out for him. He's only $80 or $70 ahead of Adrian, with a lot less cash and worse runs. NYC heading to Rochester. Not going to token it just yet. Runs for 120. PRR trainless is going to cut the runs of the B&O and the C&O. Buys the train out of the CPR. B&O upgrades Scranton. Has a pretty decent run as a result of getting that token there. Well played to Alanese. Erie lays the double O's, realizes that he doesn't have any friends to lay himself track. So just like we were talking about, has to lay the double O's for himself. Runs for 80, pays it. NYNH upgrading New York. Decent run, 180. And then CNO. I'm a pretty significant investor in this company, so I'd like to see it pay out, and it does. So now we're in stock round 6. Everybody, except for, well, let's see here. Yeah, basically everybody needs a permanent train here still. And, I'm pretty pessimistic about my odds in this game, but my goal here is to just pay out, allow other people to withhold to push trains, and then just out of pocket a train. I'm hoping to maintain share density or a share lead in order to win. So I'm not going to withhold. I'm just going to buy as many shares as I can and hope to win the game late still. But I'm fully aware that it's going to be a very tall order to come back from this. Adrian buying the B&O, Alanese, a B&O. I am buying cheaper shares because, again, I want to maximize my share lead. I think that's the only way I have a chance in this game at this point. Rumbleman, CPR, Adrian, PRR, Alanese, PRR, and I'm going for the PRR as well, just prioritizing cheap shares that are likely to pay. The PRR is safe for me to invest in up to 20% because I have Adrian as a blocker, so I'm not concerned about that. LNAs, buying the NYNH, buying it from the IPO. I'm going to go for the cheap Erie market shares. The revenue's not the best, but it has room for growth, and I'm just prioritizing cheap shares again. Alanese is going to buy a Erie as well, and I'll buy my last share, which will be an Erie. Erie potentially dumpable, but I'm feeling fairly safe since it's operating behind the B&M by a good amount, so it's going to be a little bit hard for him to dump this company. Plus, he has decent cash in the company, so I'm not feeling too in danger here. I do lose priority, but again, I'm just prioritizing. I'm really trying to make sure I get a lot of shares, so there was no way I was going to end up with priority there. B&M is first up. Probably trying to bypass Albany later in the game. Going to be a while before he can do that. He does get the token in New York. Something that I could have prevented with my NYC, but again, I was a little bit worried about the Erie tokening in Rochester, so I decided to prioritize that token over the New York token. In retrospect, that probably, well, I guess maybe was a mistake. I don't know. We'll see how things work out. CPR just trying to get some revenue as he can. He's paying out NYC, upgrades Albany, and is just maximizing revenue for now. PRR, Lancaster, he's withholding. Rubbleman has a pretty split up presidency, and it looks like he's going to be the one trying to press for a 6 or press for permanent trains here. I think that I don't know that he really needs to. I guess, well, we didn't talk about the Erie shuffling trains. So it's looking like Adrian's going to out of pocket a 6 here, and then hope to run 3 companies or 3 trains in 2 companies. With the New York token, he does have pretty good revenue in the B&M and no co-investors. So maybe Rubbleman feels obligated to rust the 4s because he sees this situation developing. This is only possible because the B&M got the token in New York, so maybe I should have, in retrospect, prioritized blocking that in the last operating round more than I did. B&O upgrading Baltimore. Erie upgrading the double O's and is going to sell shares to buy the 6. So now we're just sitting waiting for the D trains to come out. And again, I've already said I'm not going to be withholding for trains. I'm going to let the other players bring them out and then just out of pocket the D train. At least that's my thought. And the D run on the NYC may be decent. Not going to be running through these double O's, was blocked here by the Erie, but I will be able to run through this double O and then potentially down into Chicago or into Pittsburgh and points east. A token on Pittsburgh here would be decent, and I think that may be one of the reasons I didn't token New York is because I wanted Rochester and Pittsburgh instead. New York and Rochester may have been better in retrospect. So getting better runs for himself west for both of his companies. He's going to withhold. This is painful for me. I have a pretty significant investment in that company. B&M going to have really nice revenue for the time being as a result of the 2 companies, 2 trains. CPR realizes he doesn't have the track points to really contest the double O's from the Erie, so going to head up towards the Canadian offboard. He's withholding as well. NYC, I get the upgrade in Dunkirk, and I'm going to protect that, hoping that we won't see the C&O and B&O player, double upgrade Pittsburgh and rush over here to token me out. B&O is making some moves towards Erie and the double O's. We'll see. PRR upgrades Pittsburgh, withholds. So a lot of players withholding here. And again, that's my conscious decision just to let them do that and hope to eventually survive out of pocketing a D train. NYH, having said that, is now withholding. I forgot that I did that. I think maybe I buy the train out of the NYC here. Not yet. So I think I am cognizant of the fact that I am eventually going to need a D train in the NYC. So maybe I was hoping to withhold here and then buy the 4 out of the NYC in the next operating round. I forget some of the details here. Erie heading up towards the offboard, withholding. And he's going to buy a train out of the B&M. So the B&M is not anywhere near the upgrade, really. And he's denying himself the double run out of New York, which he would have been guaranteed, I think, which is a little bit interesting. C&O withholds. It's withheld twice now. Yeah, so by buying the train into the Erie, he cost himself a run here. And in retrospect, I should have been paying closer attention to this because this telegraphs what he's going to do afterwards. He pays for 200, buys the other permanent train out of the Erie. So at this point, it should be pretty apparent what's going to happen here. He's bought the permanent, he's shuffled trains, lost a run on one of his trains to leave the Erie without a permanent train. So I have 2 shares in this company, and we pretty clearly can see where that's headed. NYC, I'm still working on getting down into Pittsburgh is my goal here, but I just don't have the track points to make it happen. This token on Rochester is going to prevent the NYNH from cooperating with me, and I only have 2 companies to begin with. I token in Dunkirk because I'm worried about this C&O getting a token over here. B&O looking to link up into Chicago. withholding. So everybody but me is preparing for this D train. PRR is going to withhold. Doesn't quite have the cash for the upgrade, but is going to shuffle a bunch of money into the CPR for the out of pocket. NYNH links up with Boston here, hoping to bypass one of these dits, and its run is a little bit better, 230. I withhold, so I'm halfway towards a permanent train, and I'm feeling okay. The NYC has some potential running from New York down into Pittsburgh. I'm halfway towards a permanent train. I have the share lead. I mean, I'm not loving my position in this game by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm feeling okay. Um, Hopefully, won't have to sell shares. Can just shuffle once and then have the other players buy my D train for me. Is my thinking at this point in the game. So I put all that money into the NYC, setting it up for a D run, and then the Erie runs. CNO is going to bring out the D train, and we're into the stock round. And the way this ends up happening is really bad for me. So really, the only way the Erie was going to be dumpable, trainless, was if this exact event occurred where the D train came out after it had already run. Otherwise, he was going to have to shuffle a train into the Erie. So the company that I wasn't worried about being dumpable actually ends up being dumpable. So Rumbleman is going to buy shares in the B&M. This is going to be the best company in the game because this company is going to go away. So he's going to have 2 trains socked away in that for the rest of the game. Adrian is dumping the Erie on me. And, I had like a kind of glimmer of hope here that maybe I could win this with a stock lead, but this seals my fate. This is not a winnable position anymore. My only hope here would be for someone to mess up and allow me to do a triple company dump on them in the operating round, which I think all these players are good enough to avoid. And I think the reason Adrian is doing this is because he thinks that by dumping a company on me, he's going to cause me to bankrupt. And with a high payout in B&M in OR 7.1, he thinks his net worth is going to be high enough ahead of Rumbleman and these other players that if I bankrupt, he's going to win. Because otherwise, this decision to run 2 trains in the B&M makes no sense. The actual runs for these companies, runs for these trains are not good. So it's actually a lot less revenue than just running the second train in the Erie. So if I don't bankrupt here, Adrian actually really hurt himself by doing this dump. He sold 2 shares and is falling behind in stock density compared to everybody else to put all of his eggs in the B&M basket, hoping that I bankrupt. Alanaze is going to buy a B&M too. It's the best share in the game by far. I buy the second to last. Rumbleman buys it, and I'm fully aware at this position how rough my position in this game is. But I'm not going to just roll over. I'm still going to buy shares. Adrian is buying shares. Alanaze buying my NYC, which is a little bit ballsy. I mean, I'm not going to dump it on him, but I could. And he trashes it. So I think he is hoping just to increase his net worth a little bit in case I bankrupt and he's contesting the victory against Adrian. So I buy a B&O, still just working on buying as many shares as I can. Adrian's going to buy my IPO shares. I buy an IPO share. I buy the Erie, just trying to avoid what happened to be on the CNO where my company gets stolen away from me at an inopportune time, even though I'm not really anticipating these shares running anytime soon. Adrian's passing, and everybody's content to let me go last in priority. So B&M, this is the big moment for B&M. It gets to run for a massive 370. So he is, a good ways ahead of his competitors in terms of net worth. And if I were to bankrupt here, he's assuming he would win. But I'm not going to bankrupt here. Why would I bankrupt when I don't need to? It's a tournament. If there's a chance I can win, I'm going to stay in the game. So I am continuing to try and get the NYC down here to have good D runs. And I'm just going to shuffle until the other people buy my D train for me. So it's kind of a boring strategy, but it's not going to work out for Adrian. Guarantee that. B&O. B&O is blocking me from heading East, which is, I mean, this is Alanaze. He wants to protect both his CNO and BNO. This is absolutely the right decision. So Alanaze has really played quite well this game. Um, really has been aware of the game state and really taken advantage of all the opportunities he's gotten. CPR is going to out of pocket the D, so we're seeing a little bit of a different strategy here. He's just going to immediately buy it out, whereas I'm going to shuffle until I can afford it. PRR getting a run into Chicago, looks like. Runs for 280. Erie, my new company, doesn't really have a whole lot it can do, but it really doesn't want the CPR to have the opportunity to token it out here. So I'm going to lay some tragic track for the CPR and use my other companies to ensure there's not valid upgrades into C11 for the CPR. And I have to shuffle again. NYNH. So this is a goal at preventing a upgrade here on C11. And I'm shuffling still. CNO has its train, so this is my glimmer of hope here, is that Alanaze is going to run for enough on the CNO that I can buy a D train quickly and start running my companies again. But unfortunately for me, it's just 320, not as high as I had been hoping, so it's going to be pretty slow working my way towards the D train. So if we just look here, if I had bankrupt on the NYNH before this run occurred, Adrian would have won. But the CNO gets a run, and now the net worth between these two players is very, very close. So I think that was the one window that Adrian had to win this game, as if I had bankrupted right away. He's going to run the B&M again, but the B&M's prospects now are pretty much maxed out. There's not a whole lot that the B&M is going to be able to do. NYC, still trainless, going to have to shuffle. So I do manage to get access into Chicago, but my goal here was to get into Pittsburgh because Chicago's only $70, whereas Pittsburgh into Philly here is going to be $120, $130. So, and more importantly, I think from Alanaze's perspective is that I'm not able to cut his runs at Pittsburgh with the track the way it's upgrading. So he's done a really nice job of keeping me out of Pittsburgh. I shuffle again, B&O. Just laying more bad track for me so I can't run into Pittsburgh from the west. CPR blocked at Barry. PRR. I'm not entirely sure what Rumbleman is trying to accomplish with this. Yeah. CNO, my former company running for 320 again. Paying it out. Erie, trainless, so I'm just going to be shuffling here. Last operating round in the set, and I'm just curious if we look at the net worth, is Alanaze ahead yet? He is. Yeah, so that 7.1 was Adrian's one shot at this win. B&O working on getting into Columbus potentially, trying to increase runs for the CNO to run down this way. NYC. I think I finally do buy the D train here. So it took me 3 operating rounds here. And now that I have 2 trains, I can run at least one of my companies. But if we look at the net worth here, I'm so far behind the other players that even though I didn't bankrupt, this is even, I'm going to shuffle these 2 companies here. This is just not a winnable position for me. So CPR running a D train for 140, PRR 280, CNO still at 320, and then I shuffle. Well, actually, because of the way these companies are falling back and shuffling trains around, I do eventually get to run the NYNH, but then the Erie has to buy the train out of it, so it's still in a death spiral for myself. So at this point, nothing else interesting in the game happens. My only chance here was to dump a company. Nobody gave me that opportunity. And I'm not going to bankrupt at this point. So it's basically just everybody buys the paying shares and then we just run trains until the bank breaks. I did have to sell an NYC here, and I sold that share intentionally because I was assuming that it wouldn't look safe for the other players to invest in. But I think we immediately see that everybody buys my company. So I don't get to buy my share back. So that's just kind of adding insult to injury at this point. I sold the share assuming that I would be able to buy it back, but Rumbleman is unafraid and realizes that it's probably going to hurt me more to dump the NYC on him than it would help myself. So the rest of the stock round is just everybody max buying shares. I think everybody hits their cert limit. Actually, not. That's because there's so many yellow companies. But everybody's pretty much close to 16 shares. Everything's bought out except for my two kind of trash companies. And we're just going to wait for the bank to break here. The bank is 8,000, so we actually have to go through two sets of operating rounds, but it's really a very boring game at this point. So we're just going to skip to the end and congratulate Alanaze, who takes this a fairly narrow victory over Adrian, and will be advancing to the final game of the tournament. I think Alanaze played really well. He had a little bit of a rough start in the auction because he had to start the B&O, but he was able to rehabilitate that position, and by taking the C&O, he just was able to shut things down and win the game. I don't think Alanaze really made any big mistakes in this game. I certainly made some pretty critical mistakes. We talked about the Scranton and C&O behavior. That was definitely game losing for myself. I think Adrian's play, in the early and mid game was highly questionable. He pushed for bankruptcy after he had really kind of antagonized me. And was expecting me to just give him the win, which obviously is never going to happen. So I'm going to be a little bit critical of that. And then Rumbleman, I think Rumbleman played solidly. He was in a position where he felt he was under the gun and he had to push for bankruptcy, and he did. It didn't work out for him, but I totally understand the rationale there. So I think that Alanaze played fine, didn't make any big mistakes, and wins as a result. So congratulations to him. That was well done. This brings my tournament life to an end. I will continue to comment the tournament, of course. Excited to see how everybody else does and who the eventual winner is, and hopefully you'll watch along with me. Thanks for watching. Track Talk will be back.